welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today I want to cover a topic that follows on from what I talked about in the last video. So last time I went over the criteria that I used to choose a vehicle to drive around Africa for 3 years, and lots of people asked, what about if you fly and buy a vehicle somewhere in the world? So let's say you're going to South America, let's say you're going to Africa, Europe. What if you fly there, buy a vehicle, and then do your overland trip? You know, what are the options with that? And it turns out, like most things when you go global, it actually is very complicated and it's very country specific. So this is a very detailed topic. We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to start out talking about sort of general things to consider. Then I'll talk about different regions of the world. And then at the end, I'll talk about sort of a special case scenario that lots of people have been doing lately that I think can work really well. So if you're interested in going global and you think maybe it makes sense to fly and buy, stick around. I'll get into all the details right now. So on the surface, flying to somewhere else and buying a vehicle, it seems like a really good idea. Why waste all of that money shipping to Africa and then back again like I did if you could just fly there and buy a vehicle? And you're right, it makes sense on the surface, but there's a few reasons that make it complicated and sometimes actually make it impossible. And so the first thing we have to consider is the legalities of doing that. What we have to remember is whenever we're going around the world, we're merely tourists in whatever country we go to. And lots of countries, they don't allow tourists to register vehicles in their own name. And you really need the vehicle in your name so that it's legal whenever the police stop you, so that you can cross borders into adjoining countries and all of that. So the first hurdle you have to overcome is, can you even register the vehicle in your name? And what's that going to take? You know, some countries just straight away say, you have to have a driver's license from our country. Okay, so what does it take to get a driver's license? For example, in the US, when I go there as a tourist, what it requires is a visa that's more than 3 months long. And usually when I enter the US, I just get a little 3-month visa waiver. That means I can't get a US driver's license. That means I can't register a vehicle in the US. So actually, it's quite similar in other parts of the world. Many countries in Europe won't let you register a vehicle as a foreigner. So this is something you really need to research, and I'll get into specific locations later in the video. The next thing you need to consider, when you're flying around the world to buy a vehicle, you might have access to some really cool things, like if you go to South Africa, you might get a 70 series Land Cruiser or a Land Rover Defender. But the thing is, you have no idea what the service history on that vehicle is like. Has it been used and abused? Maybe. Has it been well looked after? You don't really know. And so you might end up buying a lemon, or you might end up buying something really good. It's difficult to say. And the other thing too, when you're on the other side of the world, remember you won't have access to your workshop, your friends, your tools. Depending on the country, you can't just zip into Home Hardware and get whatever you want to build your shelves and your cabinets. So while buying a four-wheel drive in a foreign country sounds like a good idea, outfitting it is also going to be quite difficult. Remember too, in many countries around the world, vehicles are much more expensive than you'll be used to in your home country, especially if you're from the United States. Most countries in the world have really high import taxes, and things just cost more than they do in the United States. So don't be surprised at all if something you can buy in the United States is $20,000 or $30,000. It could easily be $50,000 or $60,000 if you're in South Africa or South America. That's actually really common. Another thing you have to really think about on the legality side is, even if you get the vehicle registered in your name, let's say you can even get a carnet de passage if you really need one for where you're going in the world. The trick will be, how are you going to renew that down the road? Most jurisdictions, it lasts for 12 months. And at the end of that 12 months, chances are you've already driven into a neighboring country, or you're certainly not at the same location you were. You probably use the address of a hotel or something as your permanent address in the country. But if you've already moved on, renewing your registration, your insurance, and maybe your carnet de passage, that's going to be quite difficult. And chances are you don't have friends and family in that country where you registered the vehicle. So that's really a snag Because to get temporary imports and to keep your carnet de passage valid, you must keep the registration current and you must obviously have insurance. So it is a requirement, you have to find a way to do it, but many countries aren't just going to let you renew it, especially if you're not even in the country and you don't even have a valid tourist visa anymore. Because let's say you left South Africa months ago and you've been roaming around Botswana and Namibia, oh, you currently don't even have a legal status in South Africa at all. Yeah, you could drive all the way back there just to renew it. I guess that's an option, but this is the kind of thing you have to think about. Along that same line, you have to start thinking about how are you going to sell the vehicle when the trip is over. And again, if you plan to do some sort of loop of Southern Africa, start in South Africa, roam all the neighboring countries and wind up back in South Africa some number of months later, maybe that's not such a big deal. But if you're planning to drive from the tip of South America all the way up through South and Central America, you're going to wind up in the US or Canada or wherever with a vehicle that has plates on it from Chile. You can't necessarily just sell that vehicle. That's going to be really difficult. So are you going to ship it back? Are you going to abandon it? Are you going to try to find a way to sell it illegally? Again, these are things you really have to consider. And as you can see, all of these things that I'm presenting to you, they're just more difficulties or more challenges compared to if you just ship your vehicle over that you already own legally free and clear. So you can see there's quite a few things you have to consider at the high level, but let's talk specifics for a minute because there's a few scenarios that I think are really important to talk about. And the first one is, the Pan American Highway. Lots of people always ask, can I just fly to South America and buy a car? And the answer is, well, it depends on the country. And you have to be really careful. There's a couple of gotchas. So for example, Argentina, absolutely, you can buy a vehicle, you can register it in your name, even when you're a tourist, you'll get insurance. That's great. You can start exploring Argentina, but they have a really specific law that says tourists cannot take Argentinian registered vehicles outside of Argentina. And I actually bumped into a few backpackers who'd gone all in on a vehicle, so there was like 5 of them. They got to the border of Chile. Nope, they got turned around. You can't leave Argentina with that vehicle you just bought. So while exploring Argentina is really cool, chances are you went to South America because you want to see more, so you can't buy a vehicle in Argentina. That just puts an end to that. For that reason, buying vehicles in Chile is actually reasonably common for foreigners, and it can be done, but you have to get this government ID number. I think it's called an RUT. And you have to get a local to kind of sponsor you to help you get one of these things. And can it be done? Yes. Is it a pain in the neck? Yes. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. You'll be going back and forward to government offices, trying to prove that you have this sort of ID number. Then I think you have to get a local license. Then you can register the vehicle, submit all the paperwork. Now you might have to wait a week or a month or 3 months before the paperwork even comes back. Now legally you are the owner of the vehicle. Okay, now you can finally drive into Argentina. How long did that take? How long did you even have for your trip? So don't think that you can just sort of fly there, buy a vehicle and be on the road that same week. It doesn't usually go like that. Obviously, there's a lot more countries in South America, and I don't know all the specifics myself. Most of this I've just gleaned from people I've bumped into on the way or hanging out on the Pan American Travelers Association. That's a group on Facebook that's really active. But if you want to buy a car in Bolivia or Uruguay, or I think Brazil you can buy a car, you're going to have to do all that research yourself. And the best chance you have is to find someone else who's done it before you. Start Googling, start stalking the Facebook groups, check out anyone on ADV Rider who's done it before you, get in contact with them and find out what it was like. And if you are getting that info, don't look for info from 2010 or even 2015. Try to get the most up-to-date info you can, because that kind of stuff changes all the time. For Africa, the most common thing that people do is fly into actual South Africa and buy a vehicle there. And there are plenty of great four-wheel drives on offer. Lots of them are even outfitted. And yes, you totally can do it. Again, you have to get a local ID number, and then that will allow you to register the vehicle. I met some people that did it. It took them about 2 or 3 weeks. They said it was annoying. They had to keep going back and back to the vehicle registration office, but they did get it done. The vehicle was in their name, and then they were able to roam around Southern Africa. Their trip was less than 12 months, so they didn't have to worry about re-registering it. And South African vehicles can go into virtually all the countries in Southern and Eastern Africa without need of a carnet de passage, so they didn't even have to get one of those. So certainly you can do that, although another gotcha to think about there is that's going to be a right-hand drive vehicle, because in South Africa, they drive on the other side of the road, the steering wheel is on the right-hand side. Maybe that's not a problem for where you want to go, but make sure you do your research. You won't be able to drive it into Central America. So you can't buy it in Southern Africa, tour all of Africa, ship it to South America, and then drive all the way back to the US. You won't be able to do that. But certainly that's a reasonably common thing to do, and I did meet quite a few people that have done it. For Europe, the story varies very much by country. I know lots of people want to register vehicles in Germany, and technically, tourists can't register vehicles, but if you get the help of a local German person, you might be able to get what's called export plates, which are special license plates that are really only temporary for 12 months, which go on a vehicle designated to be leaving Germany, I think maybe even leaving the whole EU, within 12 months. Friends of mine did that with the help of some locals, obviously because they speak German, and to just sort of navigate all of the paperwork and all the legalities. But it was quite tricky, not straightforward, and not easy. Many other countries in Europe, they just outright say tourists can't register vehicles in your name. So you need to, again, do your research and double check what you're getting into. In Australia, it's no problem at all. Tourists fly there all the time, buy whatever vehicle you want, drive it around for as long as you want, and then sell it again. Obviously, Australia being a relatively contained island, that works pretty well. So you can see it's not straightforward to have legal ownership and then drive a vehicle around the world that comes from a country other than your own. So there is another option that is becoming really popular, and I'm a little bit hesitant to mention it because it's even more complicated, although more people seem to be doing it. And that is to buy a vehicle from another foreign traveler. So as an example, I drove my Canadian Jeep all the way down to Argentina. When I got there, I sold it actually to a French tourist. So he was not a resident of Argentina, so it didn't get Argentinian plates on it. In fact, it kept its Canadian plates. We transferred the Canadian ownership of that vehicle to a Frenchman while the vehicle was in Argentina. And in fact, he'd never even been to Canada before. Now, this is quite a tricky scenario, and there's a few different ways you can go about it. Every way has its pros and cons, and if it's really something you want to do, hang around the Pan American Travelers Association group on Facebook. There's a guy on there who's assisting people to do it each and every week, and he's really good at the paperwork. But the general story is, say I'm in Argentina and I have a temporary import permit in my name. Me and the new guy who's buying it, we drive to the border of a neighboring country. When we leave Argentina, that temporary import permit is cancelled, so the vehicle is not really legally in any country at that point. Then what you can do is change over the ownership papers. So we tear up my ownership registration and we get his out. Maybe you put new license plates on it if it needs that. Then when we arrive in Chile, the new guy says, hey, I'm the owner of this thing. I want a temporary import permit for Chile. And that's how it works, all free and good. That's one way to go about it. Another way is that it actually keeps its original plates and even its original legal owners on paper. But then what you do is you go and get a power of attorney from a lawyer in one of these Latin American countries. And in Spanish, a power of attorney is called a poder, and lots of people just refer to it as that. And what this legal document says is, I, Dan Grech, authorize Jim Smith to drive my vehicle in every country of the world for all time, blah, blah, blah. Sign it, date it. It's all in Spanish. You won't read much of it anyway. And then the theory goes, he can actually drive it all the way back up to Canada or wherever he wants to. And at every border, he's actually showing the ownership papers that it's mine. But then he shows this power of attorney that says, oh, but by the way, this guy Dan has allowed me to drive it. Now, you might think this sounds pretty sketchy, and it does sound sketchy, but the reality is tons and tons of people are doing it. It's becoming more and more common all the time. And actually now there are people who've done this more than once with the same vehicle. So a vehicle has been driven down from the US down to South America, and it's changed hands, different tourists, 4 or 5 times, and they just keep getting one of these power of attorneys every single time. Of course, a power of attorney potentially will have problems because you don't know if any given country is just going to deny you, because they'll say, no, we don't accept that. You have to be the legal owner. You don't know if the original registration expires. What are you going to do about that? And all kinds of legal sort of little grey areas like that crop up. And the reason you might want to buy from another tourist is because let's say they decked out a nice 4Runner up in the US, you know, rooftop tent, fridge, all the works. They drove all the way down to Argentina and then they realized, oh, shipping it back is actually a pain in the neck and it's really expensive. So they decide instead to sell it. And the thing is, they kind of get a bit desperate because maybe they book plane tickets, maybe whatever. I see this all the time on forums online. So they start lowering the price. And every now and again, real bargains show up where you could buy it for $5,000 or $10,000 less than it would be worth if it was in the US. So it is a real valid option. If you kept your eyes on the lists, you could find one, contact them, you know, buy it, then just fly down, pick it up, and you're good to go. And the hope is, you know, it's already an overland vehicle. It probably has some storage cabinets, some lock boxes, some sort of drinking water setup, maybe dual batteries and solar panels. Like, it's been decked out because people have already been using it for so long. So it can definitely work to buy a vehicle off other overlanders. And also, with changing ownership, it can be really sticky depending exactly on what country and what state within that country the vehicle is registered. You may or may not be able to transfer ownership when the vehicle's outside the country, when the owners are outside the country, and all of that kind of stuff. And it might work really well if you have family back in the US, in the state you're looking to register this thing. Maybe they can go into the DMV and do a lot of the paperwork on your behalf, maybe. But of course, if you don't have family there, then all bets are off. Same story goes. Let's hypothetically say there are some travelers from Denmark. They brought their car over, they drove it all the way to South America. Now they're looking to sell it. If you're from Denmark, yeah, maybe you can make that work. I don't know the legalities for Denmark, but it sort of makes more sense. You already have a Denmark driver's license, you have a Denmark passport, all of that stuff. But let's say you're from Canada like me, and you really want to buy their sweet Unimog that they brought over from Denmark. Can you do that? I have no idea. Again, I've never been to Denmark. I don't know anything about how Denmark's paperwork system works. So I kind of need to get it registered in Denmark. Chances are I can't register it in Canada because without it coming here, it can't be imported. So it won't get Canadian plates until it comes into Canada, which means it needs to have Denmark plates on it until I can get it back to Canada. Can I do that? Will Denmark issue me plates, even though I'm not there, even though I don't have a driver's license? I seriously doubt it. Maybe there are some countries in the world where you can find loopholes, or maybe the seller is so motivated, they're going to go back to the vehicle office in Denmark and they're going to make it happen. I don't really know. These are all kind of the question marks, or the nobody is 100% certain where the legalities begin and end when you get into all of these kind of complicated scenarios. And the reason you're not going to put local plates on it is because countries like Argentina and Chile, they have 100% import tax. And that's just not on what the value of the vehicle that you say. My little Jeep that I drove to Argentina, I would have said it was valued at $5,000. No, it goes on the value they declare it at. So they have a big master book, they look it up, they say, oh, Jeep Wrangler made in America, well, that's expensive, that's $25,000. We have 100% import tax, so you have to pay us $25,000 in import tax before it can even be legally registered in Argentina. Then you have to go through all the paperwork, and you basically can't do that unless you're an Argentinian citizen or resident. I don't believe tourists can do it. So you've paid $25,000, now a citizen has to go through all the effort and paperwork to get it imported. Who even knows what that means? Finally, then it would have Argentinian plates on it, and at that point, in theory, you could sell it to an Argentinian or whatever. But of course, a tourist can't take it out of Argentina. So same story goes in virtually every country in the world. You really don't want to import it into the country that it happens to be in. The legalities, the costs, the complexity of all of that just turn out to be a royal pain in the backside, and it's not something that many overlanders really tackle. The only asterisk on that is, let's say someone's selling a sweet 70 series Land Cruiser down in Argentina. Let's say that it's currently 13 years old. I'm in Canada, I can import vehicles to Canada if they're 15 years or older. So I might say to myself, okay, I'll fly down there, I'll buy this thing, I'll do whatever it takes to get it in my name, whatever plates it happens to have on it. Let's say, I don't even know, the person originally came from New Zealand. Somehow, if I can find a way, now I own it legally, or I have one of these Podares or whatever. By the time I eventually get it back to Canada 2 years later, it'll be 15 years old. I can show up at the border of Canada and say, "Hi Canada, I want to import this vehicle and make it Canadian." And that kind of works because I'm a resident of Canada, my home is here, I live here. But again, that's going to cost a lot of money and time and effort. But it could work, you know, if you buy some sweet vehicle in Europe and you want to bring back to the US once it's 25 years old. All of these kind of ideas that can work. People always say, you know, can I do this? What about that? What about this? Usually the answer is some version of yes, it depends. It depends on the precise specifics. What country is the seller from? What country is the buyer from? Where is the vehicle right now? Is the insurance expired right now? Is the registration expired? You know, all of these kinds of questions. And you might end up finding there are just complete roadblocks. There are just complete, no, you cannot legally own a vehicle that's registered in Sweden unless you're a Swedish citizen. That may just be a rule in Sweden. I made that up, I have no idea. But there are definitely countries where that is true. So the real big bottom line here is buyer beware. If you're going to fly around the world and buy a vehicle, you really have to do a lot of homework. And my best advice is follow someone who's done it before you. If you can find a really recent blog post, people are like, we flew to Chile, we bought a Chilean vehicle, we got it in our names, here's the exact step-by-step, here's the WhatsApp number of the guy that helped us, here's the GPS coordinates of the bank we went to. All of that stuff is absolute gold for us as overlanders. So if you can find a guide like that, yeah, I'd be willing to take the risk to fly down and buy a vehicle with Chilean plates on it. But on the other hand, if there's a vehicle sitting down in South America that has plates on it from a country like Lithuania that I literally know nothing about, would I be willing to go down there and put $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 down to maybe be able to own it? Sounds like a bit of a risk to me. So I hope all of that info has been helpful, and I hope it helps you make decisions about what you're going to do when you start taking your overlanding global. And I know it's a shame. The answer to a lot of it is it depends, and usually it depends on how stubborn you are, although you do have to be careful to avoid those parts of the world where it's just impossible. But if it's all been helpful, please do hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel, it really helps. I bring out new videos every Monday and Thursday aimed to help you get out there and go around the world in your own overland vehicle. So if you've got a topic you'd like to know more about that I haven't covered yet, please don't be shy, leave a comment down in the description of this video and just ask, what would you like to know about that I haven't covered yet? I'm always open to new ideas. And over on Patreon, I'm giving my supporters the details of where I'm heading next. So I am flying out in less than 2 months, and I am buying a vehicle when I arrive at this destination. So a lot of the info I've given you today actually applies to what I'll be doing here really soon. And if you want to know where am I going, what vehicle am I getting, what are my modifications, what are my considerations, all of that information is available right now over on Patreon. So there's a link down in the description. The lowest support level is just $5 a month, and you get unlimited access to ask me questions as well about anything, whether it's your vehicle and your trip, or you want to know more about what I'm doing. Over on Patreon, I reply to absolutely everything. So I hope it's been helpful. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.